I mean, like you'd mentioned, relationships, marriages, situationships, whatever the ship shall be, are complicated, and they should be depicted as complicated, because any relationship you see on screen that is all roses and, just celebrates the good in the relationship, I think can be quite boring to watch. You want to see the nitty-gritty, you want to see the real, you want to see what it's like behind closed doors.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of BET Talks. I'm your host, Unique, and today's guest is not only a singer, playwright, and actress, but you've seen her in a multitude of movies, from Captain Marvel to The Woman King. She's also the first woman and black woman to play 007 in the latest installment of James Bond, and now she's taking on the role of Rita Marley in the upcoming Bob Marley pick. Please welcome Lashana Lynch. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am great. This is like the first biopic I've ever experienced where people were singing and dancing in the movie theater. Have you experienced that in any of the screenings yet?
No, I haven't yet. But I'm glad. That's exactly what you should be doing, to be honest.
Like, it was so funny because, like, as the movie's playing and his different songs are intertwined in the movie, you just hear people humming and singing along. But by the end of the movie, people were, like, dancing out of
their seats?
Yeah, they were dancing
Wow.
out of the theater. And I was like, wow, I've never, like, experienced that while watching a movie.
Yeah.
So, like, can you just speak on, like, taking on this role and what it meant to you, especially being of Jamaican descent?
Oh, that's the main thing. When you're able to marry your culture and your career and I guess your life journey in the same space, it's really special, and it's a moment to celebrate for me because, having immigrant grandparents, parents, they come to another country to be able to just have a good life. And now I'm being able to gift them with this role, which, we've loved Rita Marley since the beginning of her time. So it's a really special moment, and playing her has been, one of the biggest honors of my career, I'd say.
I would definitely want to know, what were your parents' reactions when you told them?
It was weirdly a mixture between a lot of screaming, a lot of high squeals, and kind of course. And my mum is very confident. She's like, who else is going to play it? Who else? It had to be you. So, they're elated, and, just like I said, they're just happy that they have children that are, in the creative arts who are able to make something of themselves and really speak for their culture and stand up for themselves and shine a light on the kinds of narratives that are important for us.
Now, this movie, it kicks off in 1976 when there's, like, all this turmoil happening in Jamaica. Did your parents ever discuss, or your grandmother ever discuss, like, what it was like during that time?
No. That's one thing I really want to encourage audiences of their generation when watching this movie to really talk about it, because there's so much that I didn't know. That this whole experience was a real education for me, and I'm glad that I could lean on my Jamaican upbringing when playing this role, but I also needed to very much so educate myself on the time, the era, what it was like, what was the feeling on the ground, and my parents didn't really speak to me about that time, but that's also what happens with immigrant parents when they come from something. They want to talk about good things, things that they're ushering their children into, bring them into a new life, bring themselves into a new life and a new way of thinking. So I hope that their generations and above can now see this movie and want to actually discuss that time and what it was like for them in their spirit,
Because the reason I asked that, because, like, there was, like, a reference to something that really happened with the orphanage. And there was this lady behind me that says, I remember when that happened.
Really?
Yes. And I was just like, well, that's fascinating, because, like, it's now making people relive moments that they probably forgot about and probably will talk about later that we didn't know about. With this movie, it's a love story. A very honest depiction of what Black love really is, how it's not all butterflies. It's very complicated. Do you think you could have, like, did what Rita did, the way she stayed with Marley through all their troubles?
I would like to think that I'd have the gusto to, and I respect her for being able to. She is a different level. She's a different caliber of strength that I've had the honor and the pleasure of meeting. It takes a strong woman like that to be able to uphold the kind of legend that he was, the kind of legend that he is. Thanks to her work, the whole world still knows about him and still feels his music and his legacy daily, I want to say. Could I have? I don't know. We're in a different time, and it very much so was a different time. And I tip my hat off to her. It was a pleasure learning how she was able to have the life that she did in those circumstances.
Because definitely during the Paris scene, when you guys are outside having that argument, that's where I was like, yo, like you can really see their love for each other. Even though this is not the greatest of conversations, you guys definitely portray like the type of love that they had for each other no matter what they were going through.
I mean, like you'd mentioned, relationships, marriages, situationships, whatever the ship shall be, are complicated, and they should be depicted as complicated, because any relationship you see on screen that is all roses and, you know, just celebrates the good in the relationship, I think can be quite boring to watch. You know, you want to see the nitty-gritty, you want to see the real, you want to see what it's like behind closed doors. And it's those kind of conversations that I think, especially in the Black community, to show that you can have disagreements and that you can still have this relationship that is grounded and has a foundation on friendship. I think that was the most important thing that I learned about the two of them. They had a really cool, almost sibling-like, and that's their words, friendship that kind of kept them rooted in something different. So it doesn't matter what was happening with them, it doesn't matter what was happening around them, they were still friends. And I think that's probably the power of their love, really.
And I know you talked numerous amount of times about how you got to spend time with Rita and to learn how she was as a person. In the scene, it starts off with the assassination attempt. So like, were you able to talk to her about like how, even though that happened to her like during a time before like they had the small concert, how she still had the strength to like leave that hospital and still go on that stage to perform with him and still stand there instead of just being like, no, I'm gonna just sit in the back for a while?
She's definitely not a sit in the back kind of gal.
Not at all.
Definitely not. I learned that for free. When I went to see her the first time, I, like a kind of, you know, real student, came with my notebook of like pages and pages of questions and the kind of answers I would want, and I knew that those answers would be really helpful in the scenes that I was looking at the time. But what I realized going into her space, which was the most peaceful, balanced space I've ever been in, is that I can't approach portraying her as an actor. I have to become a vessel for the life that she led and the slice of life that we're telling in the movie. Me asking difficult questions just didn't, and triggering questions, it just didn't feel right to me. I didn't want to come in as a journalist, or, you know, this random girl from England who's like, so tell me about your life. Like, that's not, I didn't think it was respectful at the time, and I didn't want to put her into a space whereby she didn't feel safe to share. And that's all I wanted for her in the time that we spent together. So I just sat in front of her, crossed my legs, and just kind of like looked up at her and was like, you just tell me, you give me what you think I need. I'm playing you. I don't know what I need. I'm going to know what I need when I'm tooled with the things that are going to help me on set. But I think it's more her spirit, her energy, and her aura that was the important thing to encapsulate when approaching her. And she also wrote a book called No Woman, No Cry that I read that has all of the information that I need on her life and what she thought about herself and her relationship with Bob. Everything else was spirit. She's a spiritual being. It was only right to approach this role spiritually.
And this is like one of the first roles where you're playing like a living person instead of like having to add in your characteristics of how you think this person would react to this and react to that. Like, how much of a challenge was that?
So it's interesting because when you see Bob, there's tons of videos on Bob. There's tons of documentaries and books and articles on him. He speaks very freely at all times. He's very much so him at all times. With Rita Marley, I had to do like a lot of digging to see what was her authentic self. Like, who was she really behind closed doors? What did she speak like outside of, away from the cameras? What kind of mother was she? What kind of friend was she? What was she like with the other I3s? And my research of that was, I have the information that I have her spirit upon meeting her, And then I have this little bit in between where I remember that, unfortunately, but it was helpful for me, the world doesn't know enough about her. So I knew that my portrayal would almost be an education for a lot of people. Some people don't know that Bob was even married, or that he had children with Rita. So I knew that I had kind of like a gateway into making her my own. And I didn't want her to be a carbon copy in this film. I wanted there to be a version of her that she would be proud of, but also that people who knew her or knew her at the time recognized, but also people of our generations could relate to her. And not knowing the entirety of someone's being in the world is really helpful when you're researching a role. Yes. You're like, oh cool, there's some things that I can maybe talk to Ziggy about or Sedella like after we do a take. I'm like, would your mum do that? What about this? Could we like maybe say that in this moment she did this or did that? And they'd agree, and I'll be like, cool, okay, I've got the seal of approval from her children, so I'm good.
There's also this line that kind of stuck with me, and it is when Bob and Rita are having this conversation, and he opens up and says, how can I bring peace to the world when I don't have peace within myself? Can you like just go into like how powerful that line meant in that moment?
By that time in the movie and in his life, Bob had almost been through everything. It's like he'd taken a complete spiritual battering, it felt. And I found it very telling of their relationship that he said that in a private, intimate moment with her. It wasn't displayed, it wasn't kind of a show of his vulnerability. It was him actually questioning, where am I and how am I gonna continue on the mission that we set out to achieve in the world if I don't have equilibrium? And that was almost like I saw it in the playing of the scene as like a cry for help. Like, I need my wife to kind of remind me who I am, remind me what I need to do, because at this point it kind of feels like I'm in the wilderness. And it's powerful also to have such an incredible and legendary black man in the world that everyone thinks they know be so vulnerable in such a tender time in his life. I think it's important that as black men we're able to portray them as vulnerable and have these subtle moments that allows them to speak their heart's truth. Without that, we just see a rock star. And I think that's, is not telling the truth on someone's life.
I know for me personally with this movie, it's like, I know I had an idea of who Bob Marley was, but like this definitely made me realize like, man, I don't know nothing about this man.
Right.
Especially like within my generation. I just know this version of him, but not this version that was struggling with what seems like anxiety and PTSD and all this other stuff and still trying to like push forward.
I think that whether you are of a younger generation and kind of just know the name and some of the songs, or you are of Bob's generation in your maybe 60s, 70s, 80s and knew of him fully at the time, you are still getting an education with this movie. I'm of Jamaican descent and thought I knew everything. And I had to humble myself and say I don't know nothing.
So what was something like you learned that shocked you?
Exactly what we're talking about, just how much of an emotional being he was. And I guess that saying that out loud myself, it doesn't really make sense for me to see all of these videos of him speaking on life and, clarity of mind and purity and peace and all of that without him being a person who goes through the motions. But I guess getting a look in through the research, through talking with the children, through speaking with Mrs. Marley, I just saw how sensitive he was, which I think is really nice to learn of someone that you just see as this massive star. He just has a sensibility about him that makes you feel for him as a person, and I guess in turn helps him to create the kind of poetry that he did in the world.
So how did you decompress after this role? Because it just seems like you had to take on a lot of different feelings and emotions. Like how did you decompress after this, and what did you keep with you?
Well, firstly, I shaved my head.
Okay.
I made that a ritual from that project that I was going to make it a thing to release of whatever it is about the shoot or about the process, the actor's process or otherwise, that didn't serve me as an artist and as a person and as a woman. So I found that shaving my head was just the thing to do. My hair was short anyway, so it wasn't really a reach. And in doing that, it felt like I was leaving all of my kind of holding of Mrs. Marley's emotions in Jamaica, on the land that we are gifting Bob Marley back his self to him, if that makes sense. So that, along with quiet, a lot of quiet. I don't think I spoke to many people for like maybe a month or 6 weeks. Okay. I traveled a little bit, and then I just came home back to self and just had peace, which is another thing that I've adopted from Mrs. Marley.
I love that, because it's hard for people that aren't actors to understand like how much you have to take on to be these people, be these characters, and how much of yourself like you have to let go, and how like not lose yourself in the process. There's a lot that you take on, and I think early on in your career you just want to take it all on. You just want to be a sponge and I don't know, just show. You want to show everything. And I think as the years go on, you kind of learn to protect yourself in different ways. So I know that I'm going to enter a space like this on this movie set where it felt like I was holding a lot of emotion for the person I was playing. But I also needed to, take off the wig, take off the head wrap, take off the clothes every day, put my jewelry back on, put my shoes back on, and just sit in myself and really ask myself what this means for me. Why am I doing it? If my why isn't big enough, then yes, of course you can be swallowed up in a lot of ways, but shoots are way too long to lose yourself. It's way too long for you to not stay connected and grounded. You've also spoken about advocating and having your voice being heard on set, and you said one way you've been able to do that is like by building community with other women on set. Can you just speak on like why that's important to have?
It's important to have on a film set, but majorly important to have in every workspace, everywhere, or every family space, every friendship space. For me, when I go on to a project, I speak to the head of hair and makeup, the head of, and in my experience they've been women, thankfully, the head of costume, the heads of the sets, designs, and I just kind of like let them know that I'm here emotionally, because I see a lot of people outside of the industry obviously see us being the ones at the forefront because we're the ones selling the movie. But there's so much in this collaboration that it's really important for them to be seen and also celebrated. So at the beginning, it creates a harmony and almost like a family vibe. And if they don't feel like the artists have their back, then it kind of, I don't know, things start to lose shape, in my opinion. And I think that we need to really stand as a rock together to remind ourselves that there's power in numbers, and also feminine energy creates good energy. It really, really is real. I found that over my years to be true. So yeah, I don't know. I just think that togetherness is the only way, or else it's kind of gonna fall apart.
You also spoken about being able to like take yourself out of spaces that don't celebrate you. Can you talk about like how you practice that? Like what kicked that off for you, and why you encourage more people to do that?
So when I said that, I was reminiscing on a ballet class I used to go to when I was like 7 or 8, and the teacher was a white woman, and she didn't appreciate curves at the time. She was telling me to tuck in, and I couldn't because it was impossible for me to do so. And that was a young age for me to know and feel my blackness in a white space. It reverberated into my teens when I wanted to get into the creative arts, and then in workspaces like working in retail, and feeling like something wasn't quite right, and I knew that I personally needed to do something about it. In my career now, I just don't have the time for it. Frankly, I just don't have the time for it for myself, or seeing someone go through that also. It just feels very redundant in the end. Like, we're supposed to be celebrating each other, celebrating ourselves, and feel as though our self-worth can be encouraged in spaces where you feel it's being diminished. And if that's not happening, then I don't know, it's just a harder graft to try and get to where you're trying to get to try and achieve what you've set out to achieve, if you feel like you're being torn down at the same time.
Well, I know we're running out of time, so before we go, I just want you to give your definition of what success is, because I know, like, people read all these accolades, and there are people that don't feel like, I haven't made to that point yet. So for you, what's your definition of success?
Inner peace.
Okay.
The definition of success for me is inner peace. You can't have anything unless you're peaceful and have balance in yourself, because none of it will matter in the end, and you cannot take it with you when you physically leave the earth.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
And any last words before we go?
Inner peace.
Well, be sure to catch Bob Marley hitting theaters on February 14th.